We are on the right track to get final approval by the G7 leaders summit. The Holy Grail is to ensure long-standing funding for Ukraine. And make no mistake, the G7 countries are fully committed to provide long-standing Ukraine for Ukraine, to provide long-standing political and financial support for Ukraine. So there are many options on the table. We will work on those options to find the best one. We need to have the most solid option from both a financial and legal point of view. But I want to leave no uncertainty. We will find an agreement and we will provide to Ukraine the necessary funding.
So would you say it's close to a guarantee that there will be an agreement with leaders in 3 weeks' time for funding for Ukraine from Russian assets?
We are on the right track.
Yeah. In terms of China, where would you say that you sort of agree with the United States and disagree with the United States? Where in your approach do you think that there is total synchronicity, and where do you want to see some changes?
We agree at the G7 level that we have an issue with the Chinese industrial overcapacities. And this is not a question, anything against China. China is an economic partner. But we have an issue with the economic model in which China is producing more and more cheaper industrial devices. Because it could be a threat not only for the EU, not only for the US, but for the global world economy. And we need to address that issue. Having so many industrial devices for the green industry at a very cheap price on the global market could jeopardize the whole world economy and the growth in the world. So that's why we need to address the issue. We need to engage China, and we need to find solutions.
So there's another aspect of this, which is the United States seems to move much more quickly on some of these tariffs. For example, Europe has begun its investigation on EVs. It is still ongoing. The U.S. already just threw up EV barriers. Does Europe need to be more proactive about its sort of relationship with China? And does the EV barriers need to be at least as high as the United States?
But the EU Commission is doing the job. We have many investigations underway to re-establish a level playing field between China and the EU. We want fair trade practices. That's our point. We want to have China, the EU, and all countries abiding by the same trade rules. And if it is not the case, we have all the necessary options at the EU level to re-establish the level playing field and to have fair trade practices. But once again, don't make any mistake about the determination of the EU countries and the French determination. We have spent so much time and so much money to have new industrial plants, new industrial factories being created in France. And with President Macron, we've done a lot to have new value chains, industrial value chains in France on electric car batteries, on EVs, on green hydrogen. We don't want to have those decisions and those results to be jeopardized by unfair trade practices.
Do you think you'll have to look beyond EVs? Are there other industries that concern you that could be at risk for overcapacity?
I think of the chemical industry, aeronautic industry, green hydrogen, solar panels. So there are many sectors that could be jeopardized by unfair trade practices. So we need to engage, we need to discuss, we need to open a fair and in-depth dialogue with the Chinese government so that we can fix the issue.
And the trade issues are not just with China. You've been outspoken on the Inflation Reduction Act. Did you raise that with Secretary Yellen? Is that a conversation here at the G7?
No, today we did not open that issue because we have had the occasion already to discuss that point. And you know that at the French level, we have decided to put in place a tax credit for the green industry with the view of getting more green industry on the French soil. And by the way, we have become the most attractive country for foreign investments, which means that we are on the right direction.
I saw that. And something that could potentially jeopardize that are debt levels in France. The IMF says more needs to be done. Your own fiscal council says that the plans lack some coherence. What do you have to do to get sort of that debt level under control, particularly with an S&P credit rating decision coming at the end of the week? Do you think that borrowing costs will go up in France?
No, I think that the summary of the IMF is quite clear. The French strategy to come back to sound public finances is the right one. This is very clear in the IMF report. It is the right one because our goal to come back under the 3% of deficit by 2027 is wise and appropriate, and because we have a very clear and I think a very credible strategy based, first of all, on growth. We have growth in France. Second, on the reduction of public expenses where needed, and that's exactly what we are currently doing. And third, on structural reforms. And the Prime Minister will be announcing in a few days a new reform on the unemployment scheme, which I think is the very clear evidence that we remain fully determined to stick to the path of reforms, to stick to the path of sound public finances.
And you say that you have to sort of safeguard the future of the French economy. A crucial part of that will be your sort of AI industrial complex, if we can call it that. Would you use your power at the finance ministry to block an acquisition of some of your AI companies from an outside country?
Today, the key point is to have more cooperation. It is not to block any cooperation, but we are the leader of AI in Europe. France is the leader of AI in Europe because we have, I think, the best scientists. We have very strong startups like Mistral, and we also have a strategy based on skills, investment, innovation, access to supercalculators, including quantic calculation, and the production of chips and semiconductors on the French soil. And believe me, I really want France to remain the leader of AI in Europe. And we have one key advantage, if I may, which is the fact that in France you have decarbonized energy thanks to the nuclear plants.
So if tomorrow, say, Microsoft came and said they'd like to buy Mistral, you'd be okay with that?
We will see what are the options of cooperation between Mistral and Microsoft. For the time being, Microsoft is investing in France, is opening data center in France, and investments of Microsoft in France are most welcome.
And we have an election coming up in the United Kingdom. Could you imagine a closer relationship with the UK, with a sort of government that is perhaps a little bit less hostile to the EU?
You know, I don't want to say any word on sovereign election in the UK, but the UK is a key partner for France. And, you know, at a time where you have to face so many geopolitical tensions, especially with war being back on the European soil, having a good relationship with the UK is absolutely decisive.
And you've participated in maybe more of these meetings than almost anybody here over the years. And so I'd like to talk to you. I
confirm.
Yeah, right. Well, I'd like to talk to you about the G7 format. Do you think it is losing some of its cohesion? Because even under Biden, you see some of the economic and industrial policy being a bit America first. There's this sort of sense of Europe at it alone, particularly on defense. Is the G7 as cohesive as you'd like it to be, and does it endanger its sort of leadership position in the world?
When it comes to essential things, peace or war, or core values, freedom, you have a united G7. And the G7 remains, for me, one key format to have in-depth discussions about the future of the world and the best way of defending our values. You know, that is clearly what is at stake for the 21st century, to defend the core values of democracies against authoritarian regimes. And I'm proud that France is part of this G7, and we are very much attached to that format.
And those values are often built on things like defense and security. Would you like to see some joint debt, for example, to build out the European defense sector?
We have to be aware that we will have three sectors in which Europe must invest more. The first one is defense. Clearly, we are not at the level we should be. Even if in France, for instance, we have decided with Macron to double the defense budget at the European level, we should do more. Second, we need to invest more in the climate transition. And we need to think about new ways of funding climate transition. And third, innovation and AI. We don't want to be dependent on the Chinese or the American artificial intelligence. We want to have our own artificial intelligence at the European level, which means that from a very concrete perspective, we need to hurry up on the capital market union. Next week, there will be a very important Ministers' Council between France and Germany. The question of the capital market union will be one of the key discussions between Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron. We really want to hurry up on the capital market union to provide the necessary funding for artificial intelligence and the fight against climate change.
And much has been made about the lack of competitiveness within Europe. Yes, China is an issue, but there's also a competition issue within Europe. What is Bruno Le Maire's sort of recipe for unlocking the good of Europe without the bad of Europe?
Innovation, innovation, innovation. We should innovate before regulating. The lack of productivity in Europe should be a matter of huge concern for all the member states of the EU. When you are comparing the US and the EU over the last 3 decades, what is really striking is the fact that the gap between the US productivity and the EU productivity has been widening. I cannot accept that. And when we are explaining that we want more innovation, more risk, less regulation, less rules, less directives, it is for the view of getting more productivity, which means more prosperity for our people, more jobs, more factories, and more independence.